You look like someone the world forgot to write down. And yet, here you stand, ink-stained and breathing. The thought flickered through Albertina Grease's mind as the Southern Pacific Railroad shuddered to a halt at Reading Depot on Christmas Eve, 1892. She stood in the narrow aisle, carpetbag clutched in one hand, crumpled telegram in the other, and wondered if she had the strength to step down into a world that no longer wanted her. The train doors groaned open. Cold air rushed in, sharp as a slap, carrying with it the scent of mountain snow from distant Shasta, wood smoke, and roasting chestnuts. Somewhere beyond the platform, church bells rang out in celebration, their joyful clamor a mockery of everything she'd lost. Albertina descended the metal steps carefully. Her boots, worn thin at the soles, the leather cracked from too many miles, met the wooden planks with a hollow sound that seemed to announce her arrival as exactly what it was: unwanted. Around her, the depot exploded with motion and noise. Families embraced on the platform, their breath clouding white in the winter air. Children shrieked and laughed, weaving between their mothers' skirts while fathers loaded parcels onto waiting wagons. A fiddle played somewhere, off-key but earnest, accompanied by voices raised in a Christmas carol she'd once known all the words to. The air smelled of cedar boughs and orange peel, of train grease and someone else's life, a life she would never touch. Albertina stood motionless in the center of it all, a stone in a stream of reunion. She looked down at the telegram in her gloved hand, though she had already memorized every word during the 3-day journey west. 11 words that had unmade her future without ceremony or mercy. Engagement dissolved. Do not proceed. Situation irreversible. Udinese family. Not even a signature. No apology. No explanation. Just cold ink and colder finality. She tucked the telegram into the lining of her dark traveling coat and pulled her threadbare shawl tighter across her shoulders. The wind caught her skirt, driving needles of cold through the thin wool, numbing her knees. Her dress, the best she owned saved for meeting her intended, was far too light for Northern California's winter. But then, she'd imagined arriving to warmth, to a home, to safety. Now she had none of those things. The platform emptied slowly. One by one, families disappeared into waiting buggies and wagons, heading toward houses filled with firelight and holiday songs. Albertina watched them go, each departure making her more visible, more alone. Finally, only she remained, a solitary figure with a carpetbag that contained everything she owned and nothing that mattered. The station master, an older man with kind eyes and silver whiskers, glanced at her as he shuttered the ticket window. He gave a small nod of sympathy, then turned the key in the lock behind him. The sound echoed across the empty platform like a door closing on possibility itself. Albertina picked up her bag. Her knuckles were white against the worn leather handle. She opened her small purse and counted her money again, though she knew the answer. 19 cents. She counted it twice more, foolishly hoping the amount might change through some miracle of mathematics or mercy. It didn't. The ticket back to Vicksburg, Mississippi would cost at least $40. She didn't have enough to survive a single night in a boarding house, much less fund a return journey. Not that she could go back, not after what she'd fled. Not after the last time her stepfather had cornered her in the kitchen, his breath reeking of whiskey, his hands reaching. Not after her mother had looked away, choosing a violent man over her own daughter's safety. That life was over. But this was no beginning. Albertina forced herself to move. Instinct, not courage, propelled her forward. She walked through the heart of Reading, past windows lit with candles and pine garlands, past storefronts decorated with red ribbon and painted stars. Through one window, she glimpsed a family gathered around a table laden with food. Through another, a mother rocking a baby while older children danced. The smell of roasting meat, beef perhaps, or goose, hit her so hard she had to stop walking. Her stomach cramped viciously. She bent slightly, pressing one hand to her abdomen, breathing through her teeth until the wave of hunger subsided. She hadn't eaten since a piece of stale bread at a water stop in Nevada the day before. She'd saved the rest of her meager provisions in case of emergency. She supposed this counted. After several minutes, she found herself standing outside a 2-story boarding house. A wooden sign swung gently in the wind. Northern Star, rooms available. $4 weekly, no daily rates. $4. She might as well have been reading a sign that said 400. Albertina stood in the gathering dusk, watching snow begin to fall in soft, silent flakes. The warm glow from the boarding house windows seemed to mock her, a reminder of every comfort she would not have: shelter, warmth, food, belonging. She was a ghost at the station. A woman the world had forgotten to write down. And yet, here she stood, ink-stained and breathing, still alive. For now. Albertina turned away from the Northern Star boarding house, her breath visible in the freezing air. $4 might as well have been 4,000. She pulled her shawl tighter and walked with no destination in mind. Only the animal need to keep moving before the cold settled into her bones. The snow fell heavier now, coating the wooden sidewalks and muffling the sound of her footsteps. She passed the general store, the milliner's shop, a blacksmith's forge gone dark for the holiday. Each window glowed with warmth she couldn't touch, lives she couldn't enter. Then she smelled it. Meat, butter, fresh bread. The scent stopped her mid-step, pulling at something primal in her empty stomach. She followed it like a woman in a dream, turning a corner onto a side street, until she found herself standing outside a modest establishment with a hand-painted sign. Silver Creek Restaurant. The windows were fogged with warmth, condensation running in rivulets down the glass. Through the blur, she could make out the glow of oil lamps and the dark shapes of tables and chairs. And at one table near the window, a lone figure sat eating. Albertina didn't mean to stare. She meant to keep walking, to preserve what little dignity she had left. But hunger has a way of eroding dignity, and before she knew it, she'd moved closer to the glass. The man inside was broad-shouldered and weathered, his dark hair slightly too long, tucked behind his ears. He wore a simple work shirt and suspenders, the kind of practical clothes that came from real labor, not fashion. His face was lined in a way that spoke of years spent outdoors, his skin tanned even in winter. He cut his steak with careful, deliberate moments, eating slowly, methodically. Steam rose from his plate. Potatoes, she thought. and green beans glistening with butter. Her stomach cramped so violently she had to press her hand against the cold glass to steady herself. She must have leaned too close, or perhaps her breath against the window gave her away, because the man looked up. Their eyes met through the fogged glass. Albertina felt shame flood through her, hot and terrible. She turned quickly, ready to disappear into the snowy darkness where she belonged. But before she could take 3 steps, she heard the restaurant door open behind her. "You waiting on someone?" His voice was low, steady, no pity in it, just a question. Albertina stopped but didn't turn around. "No," she said quietly. "Not anymore." A pause. Then, "They made too much inside. Food shouldn't go to waste. You hungry?" She turned slowly to face him. He stood in the doorway, one hand on the frame, his expression unreadable. Not kind, exactly, not unkind, just present. Her pride warred with her desperation. Pride had kept her alive through terrible things, but pride didn't fill an empty stomach. "I don't have money," she said, because it was the truth. "Didn't ask if you did." He stepped aside, gesturing toward the warm interior. Albertina hesitated for only a moment before her body made the decision her mind couldn't. She climbed the 2 wooden steps and crossed the threshold into warmth so overwhelming it felt like a physical blow. The heat wrapped around her like a blanket. Her frozen fingers began to tingle painfully as blood returned to them. Her cheeks burned, her eyes watered. She stood just inside the door, trembling, unsure where to go or what to do. A large woman appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a flour-dusted apron. She had iron-gray hair pinned in a practical bun, and eyes that took in Albertina's situation in a single glance. "Sit anywhere, honey," the woman said without hesitation. "I'll bring you a plate." Albertina chose a table near the stove, not too close to the man who'd invited her in, but not far either. She sat carefully, her carpet bag at her feet, her hands folded in her lap to hide their shaking. Within minutes, the woman, Ruth, she heard the man call her, brought out a plate: beefsteak, glazed carrots, potatoes with butter melting into golden pools, and a thick slice of brown bread. Albertina stared at it, afraid that if she touched it, it might vanish. "Go on," Ruth said gently. "It's real." Albertina picked up her fork. She ate slowly at first, trying to maintain some semblance of manners. But hunger is a tide that can't be held back. Within minutes she was eating faster, no longer tasting, just consuming. The food was hot and solid and real, and for the first time in days, the gnawing ache in her stomach began to ease. Across the room, the man, she still didn't know his name, continued his own meal in silence. He didn't watch her, didn't stare. He simply ate, giving her the dignity of privacy in her desperation. When her plate was clean, Ruth brought coffee without asking. Albertina wrapped her cold hands around the best cup and felt the warmth seep into her palms. "Thank you," she whispered. Ruth nodded toward the man. "He paid for it. I just cooked it." Albertina turned to thank him, but he was already standing, placing coins on his table. He picked up his hat, settled it on his head, and walked toward the door. As he passed her table, he paused for just a moment. "Name's Boris," he said quietly. Then with a single nod, he stepped out into the snow and was gone. Albertina sat in the warm restaurant, the cup of coffee cooling in her hands, and felt something she hadn't felt since stepping off the train. Not hope, exactly, but something close. The faint possibility that she might survive this night after all. Ruth appeared again, this time with a cloth bundle. "Leftover bread," she said, pressing it into Albertina's hands. "For tomorrow." "I can't. You can. And you will." That night, Albertina found the small Presbyterian church at the edge of town. The main doors were locked, but a side entrance to the vestibule stood open. Inside, it was cold, but sheltered from the wind. She curled up on a wooden bench with her carpet bag as a pillow, and the bread, wrapped in cloth, tucked against her chest. For the first time in 3 days, she slept. Not peacefully, not deeply, but she slept. And she was warmer than she'd been since leaving Mississippi. Before we continue Albertina's story, I need to share something with you. Creating these stories takes countless hours of research, writing, and production. If you're finding yourself invested in Albertina's journey, would you consider subscribing? It truly helps this channel grow and allows me to bring you more stories like hers. A simple like and comment also makes a world of difference. 2 days after Christmas, Albertina stood elbow deep in scalding dishwater at the Nevada City Hotel, 12 miles north of Redding. Her hands were raw, her back ached, and her feet throbbed in her worn boots. But she had work. $1.50 a day, plus 2 meals and permission to sleep in the storage room behind the kitchen. She'd walked the 12 miles on the day after Christmas, following the rutted road north through pine forests and rolling hills. The hotel manager, a thin man with kind eyes named Mr. Garrett, had taken one look at her, hungry, desperate, but standing straight, and offered her the job without asking questions she couldn't answer. The work was brutal. Endless stacks of dishes from the hotel dining room, pots crusted with burned food, grease that clung to everything. But Albertina scrubbed each piece with the same fierce determination that had carried her across half the country. This was survival. This was dignity earned through labor, not begged for or stolen. She'd just finished the lunch service. 47 plates, 23 bowls, countless pieces of silverware, when an elderly woman came through the kitchen carrying a basket of linens. The woman was tall and bird-like, with silver hair pinned beneath a black lace mantilla. Her face was deeply lined, her hands gnarled with age, but her dark eyes were sharp and knowing. She spoke to Mr. Garrett in rapid Italian, gesturing toward the laundry room, before her gaze fell on Albertina. She stopped mid-sentence. "You," she said, switching to accented English. "You're the girl who was supposed to marry young Consuelo." Albertina's hands stilled in the dishwater. The plate she'd been washing slipped from her fingers and clattered against the basin. "How did you know?" The old woman set down her basket and moved closer, studying Albertina's face with an intensity that made her want to look away. "I am Signora Benedetti. I knew the Udinese family when they first came from Tuscany. Consuelo, he showed me your letters. He was so happy. So excited. He said, 'Signora, I'm going to marry a woman with a good heart.' Something twisted in Albertina's chest. Then why did he send that telegram? Signora Benedetti's expression shifted. Surprise, then understanding, then something that looked like pity. Telegram, child. Consuelo sent no telegram. But I received, Consuelo is dead. The words fell like stones into still water. Albertina gripped the edge of the wash basin to steady herself. What? 3 weeks ago, a widowmaker fell on him at the logging camp near Chico. The signora crossed herself. A dead branch, high up in an old pine. It came down during a windstorm, struck him in the head. He died 2 days later without waking. Albertina couldn't breathe. The kitchen seemed to tilt around her. She'd spent 2 days believing she'd been rejected, abandoned, deemed unworthy. But Consuelo hadn't rejected her at all. He'd died. The telegram, she whispered. It said the engagement was dissolved. It was signed by the Udinese family. Lorenzo. Signora Benedetti spat the name like a curse. The older brother. He sent it, yes. To keep you away. Why would he? To prevent complications. The old woman's voice hardened. The Udinese family is powerful, child. Timber money. They own half the logging operations between here and Chico. When Consuelo died, unmarried, everything went to Lorenzo. But if you had arrived before the funeral, if you had claimed to be his intended wife, she shrugged expressively. Complications. Questions about inheritance. Lorenzo does not like complications. Rage rose in Albertina's throat, hot and bitter. He wanted to erase me. Yes. To pretend I never existed. Yes. Signora Benedetti reached out and gripped Albertina's wet hands with surprising strength. The Udinese family is powerful. Lorenzo is not a kind man. He is ruthless in business, ruthless in life. If you stay here, if you make trouble, he will crush you. Albertina pulled her hands free and turned back to the dishwater, gripping the edge of the basin so hard her knuckles turned white. Behind her closed eyes, she saw Consuelo's letters, the only ones she'd managed to save before fleeing Vicksburg. Dear Miss Grease, the first one had begun. I hope this letter finds you well. I am a simple man with a lumber business and land in Northern California. I am looking for a woman of good character to share my life. The letters had continued for 6 months. Consuelo had written about the mountains, about the smell of pine forests, about his small house on the edge of Redding. He'd been thoughtful, kind, asking about her interests, her dreams. He'd promised safety, respect, a partnership built on honesty. I believe we could build a good life together. He'd written in his final letter, I am not a romantic man, but I am a fair one. Come to California, Miss Grease. Let us see if we might suit each other. She'd believed him. She'd believed she was coming to safety, to a new beginning, to a man who would treat her with dignity. Instead, she'd walked into a trap set by a man who wanted her to not exist. The rage crystallized into something harder, colder, determination. She thought of Vicksburg, of her stepfather's hands around her throat, his whiskey-soaked breath in her face, of her mother looking away, always looking away, of the neighbors who'd called her a troublemaker when she'd finally fought back, who'd said she was worthless, that no decent man would ever want her. She'd run from Vicksburg believing she deserved to disappear, but she'd survived that journey. She'd survived 3 days with 19 cents and nowhere to go. She'd survived by accepting help when pride would have killed her, by working her hands raw, by refusing to simply lie down and die in the snow. She would not disappear for Lorenzo Udinesi's convenience. Albertina turned to face Signora Benedetti. Her hands were still dripping dishwater, her apron soaked, but she stood straight. Where can I find Lorenzo Udinesi? The old woman's eyes widened. Child, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. Albertina's voice was steady, cold as the winter air outside. A man I never met, thought I was worth building a life with. His brother decided I wasn't worth acknowledging. I came here for safety, and instead I got erased. Well, I'm still here. I'm still breathing. And I want to look Lorenzo Udinesi in the eye and tell him I exist. Signora Benedetti studied her for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. The Udinesi Timber Company office, Main Street in Reading. But be careful, child. Lorenzo does not lose gracefully. Neither do I. That night, lying on a thin pallet in the storage room, Albertina stared at the ceiling and made her choice. She could leave, take her earnings, buy a ticket somewhere else, start over in a place where no one knew her name or her shame. Or she could stay. She could fight. She could refuse to be erased. She thought of Consuelo, buried in the ground with his dreams of a good life. She thought of his letters, his kindness, his belief that she was worth choosing. And she thought of Lorenzo, sitting in his comfortable office, believing he'd solved his problem with 11 words in a telegram. Albertina closed her eyes. She would stay. The Udinesi Timber Company occupied the finest building on Reading's Main Street, 2 stories of brick and painted wood with large windows that caught the winter sun. Albertina stood across the street for a full minute, studying it the way a soldier might study enemy fortifications. She'd walked the 12 miles from Nevada City that morning, leaving before dawn. Her feet ached, her empty stomach cramped, but she kept her spine straight as she crossed the street and pushed open the heavy oak door. Inside, the air smelled of leather, tobacco, and money. The floor was polished wood, the walls paneled in dark mahogany. A brass chandelier hung from the ceiling, and oil paintings of timber operations decorated the walls, massive trees falling, lumber camps bustling with workers, trains loaded with logs. A young clerk looked up from his desk. "May I help you? I'm here to see Lorenzo Udinesi." "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but he'll want to see me." She kept her voice steady. "Tell him Albertina Grease is here." The clerk disappeared through a door at the back. Albertina stood in the center of the room, refusing to sit, refusing to fidget. She counted her own heartbeats, 53 of them, before the clerk returned. "Mr. Udinesi will see you now." Lorenzo's office was even more impressive than the reception area. More mahogany, more brass. A massive desk dominated the space, its surface covered with ledgers, contracts, and correspondence. Behind it sat a man who looked nothing like the Consuelo she'd imagined from his letters. Lorenzo Udinese was tall and lean, impeccably dressed in a dark suit with a silk vest. His hair was pomaded and perfectly parted. His face was handsome in a cold, precise way. Sharp cheekbones, thin lips, eyes the color of winter sky. He stood as she entered, his movements controlled and graceful. "Miss Grease." His voice was smooth as oiled wood. "Please, sit down." Albertina remained standing. "I'm Albertina Grease. I was engaged to your brother." "Yes." He gestured again to the chair across from his desk. "Please, sit. May I offer you tea?" The courtesy felt like a trap, but Albertina sat, not because he'd offered, but because her legs were trembling, and she didn't want him to see. Lorenzo rang a small bell, and within moments, the clerk brought tea in delicate china cups. Lorenzo settled behind his desk, steepling his fingers. "First, allow me to express my condolences for this unfortunate situation. My brother's death was a terrible tragedy. Thank you. However," the word hung in the air like a blade, "I must be frank with you, Miss Grease. While I understand you and Consuelo exchanged correspondence, there was no formal engagement, no legal contract, no announcement in either Reading or, I presume, wherever you came from." "Mississippi." "Mississippi." He nodded as if confirming something he already knew. "You traveled a very long way based on what was, essentially, exploratory correspondence between two strangers." Albertina set down her teacup carefully. "Your brother wrote to me for 6 months. He asked me to come to California. He spoke of building a life together. My brother was a romantic, a dreamer." Lorenzo opened a drawer and withdrew a document, placing it on the desk between them. "I am neither. I'm a businessman, and as such I'd like to resolve this situation fairly and finally." Albertina looked at the paper. It was typed, official-looking, dense with legal language she didn't fully understand. But certain phrases jumped out at her. Exploratory correspondence. No binding agreement. No legal standing. No claim to estate or assets. What is this? "A document confirming that you and my brothers had no formal engagement, that your correspondence was preliminary in nature, and that you have no legal or moral claim to the Udinese name, property, or holdings." He slid a leather checkbook across the desk. "In exchange for your signature, I'm prepared to offer you $500. The number stunned her. $500 was more money than she'd seen in her entire life. Lorenzo leaned back in his chair. "This is generous, Miss Grease. You came here with nothing. You'll leave with something, enough to start fresh somewhere else. Somewhere warmer, perhaps. Somewhere that suits you better than California." Understanding bloomed cold and bitter in her chest. He wanted to erase her, to pay her to unexist, to make it as if she'd never come to Reading, never believed his brother's promises, never hoped for safety. "I didn't come here for money," she said quietly. "I came because your brother asked me to." Consuelo was sentimental. He made promises he couldn't keep. Lorenzo's voice hardened just slightly. "I'm practical. I keep my word. Sign the paper, Miss Grease. Take the money. Go back to Mississippi or go somewhere else entirely. But go." Albertina stood. The room tilted slightly, But she kept her balance. "I'll need time to consider. Don't take too long." Lorenzo's smile didn't reach his eyes. Generosity has expiration dates. Outside, the winter air hit her like a slap. Albertina walked 3 blocks before her hands started shaking, not from fear, but from pure, crystallized rage. She had no legal knowledge, no resources, no weapons except the truth. And the truth was that Lorenzo Udinesi wanted her to disappear, and he was willing to pay handsomely for it. She walked north toward Nevada City as the sun began its descent. The temperature dropped. Her worn boots slipped on patches of ice. But she kept moving, kept breathing, kept existing in defiance of everything Lorenzo wanted. She was perhaps 5 miles out of Redding when she heard the sound of a horse and wagon behind her. She moved to the side of the road without looking back, expecting it to pass. It didn't. "Need a ride?" Boris sat on the wagon seat, reins loose in his hands. He didn't ask where she'd been or why she was walking alone in the gathering dark. He simply waited. Albertina climbed up beside him without a word. They rode in silence. The only sounds the creak of the wagon and the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves. When they reached the Nevada City Hotel, Boris finally spoke. "If you need something, Silver Creek Restaurant. Leave word with Ruth." He didn't wait for an answer, just tipped his hat and drove off into the darkening evening. That night, Albertina lay on her pallet in the storage room. Staring at the stars through the small, high window, she thought about $500, about starting over somewhere else, about the safety of disappearing. Then she thought about Consuelo's letters, about his kindness, about how he'd believed she was worth choosing. And she thought about every person who'd ever told her she was worthless. Her stepfather, her mother, the neighbors in Vicksburg who'd blamed her for fighting back. Lorenzo Udinesi wanted to add his name to that list. Albertina closed her eyes and made her choice. She would not sign. She would not take his money. She would not disappear. 1 week passed. Then another. Albertina scrubbed dishes at the Nevada City Hotel, her hands raw and cracked, despite the lard she rubbed into them each night. Christmas faded into memory. The new year of 1893 approached with cold clarity, and strange things began to happen. The first gift appeared on the church steps where Albertina sometimes went to pray, a wool coat, heavy and well-made, draped over the railing. No note, no name, just the coat, still warm as if someone had only just left it there. Albertina looked around the empty street, but saw no one. She picked up the coat carefully, half expecting someone to appear and claim it. When no one did, she put it on. It fit perfectly. 3 days later, she found a basket outside the hotel's back door. Inside, jars of preserved peaches, pickled vegetables, dried venison, enough food to supplement her meals for weeks. Again, no note. Then came the boots, sturdy leather, barely worn, in exactly her size. They appeared on the bench in the church vestibule where she'd slept that first night. Someone was helping her. Someone who knew where she went, what she needed, but didn't want to be known. Albertina began asking careful questions as she worked. The hotel guests talked freely around the help, as if she were furniture. She learned that Consuelo Udinesi had been beloved in the community, a fair employer who paid his workers on time and never cheated on timber contracts. Men spoke his name with respect. They spoke Lorenzo's name with something else entirely. Fear, perhaps, or careful neutrality. Lorenzo Udinese doesn't forgive debts, one traveling salesman said over breakfast. Business or personal. On Sunday, Albertina walked to Reading to attend services at the Presbyterian Church. Afterward, she went to the Silver Creek restaurant, drawn by hunger and something she couldn't quite name. Ruth looked up from wiping tables when Albertina entered. The large woman studied her for a moment, then jerked her head toward the kitchen. "Come here a minute." In the kitchen, surrounded by the smell of roasting meat and fresh bread, Ruth folded her arms across her broad chest. "You've got people talking." Albertina's stomach tightened. "What are they saying?" "That you're the girl who was supposed to marry Consuelo. That Lorenzo offered you money to leave. That you're still here." Ruth's expression softened. "That you're either very brave or very foolish. Maybe both." Ruth smiled faintly. "You know, Boris has been paying for extra food. Every few days he comes in, orders a meal, then pays for another to be set aside. Says it's for the poor box at the church." She paused. "There is no poor box at that church." Heat crept up Albertina's neck. Her pride stung. "I didn't ask him to. He knows what it's like to have nothing," Ruth interrupted gently. "His wife and baby died of cholera 5 years ago. He was taking them to Oregon. Stopped at a way station outside Sacramento. They got sick. He was helpless. Couldn't save them. Couldn't even afford a proper burial." She reached out and squeezed Albertina's shoulder. "Let him help. We all need help sometimes. The trick is letting it in." "How do you know about letting help in?" Ruth's smile turned sad. "My husband died in a timber accident 7 years ago. Left me with this restaurant and a mountain of debt. This town fed me, kept me going, until I could stand on my own feet again. Some debts can't be repaid. They can only be passed forward." That evening, Boris came in for his usual dinner. Albertina, working up courage she didn't know she possessed, approached his table. "May I sit?" He looked up, surprised, then nodded toward the empty chair. They sat in silence for a moment. Ruth brought 2 plates without being asked. Steak, potatoes, green beans, the same meal Boris had been eating the night they met. "Why are you helping me?" Albertina asked finally. Boris cut his steak carefully, not meeting her eyes. "Because someone should have helped my wife when I couldn't." The words hung between them like smoke. "Ruth told me," Albertina said quietly, "about your wife and baby. I'm sorry." "Katya." He said the name carefully, as if it still hurt. "And our son, Petro. He was 6 months old." Boris set down his fork. "We left Ukraine to find a better life. Took everything we had to buy passage. We were going to Oregon, free land for homesteaders, but we stopped at a way station, and the cholera was there, waiting. You couldn't have known." "No, but I should have had money for a doctor, for medicine, for something." He looked at her then, his eyes holding a grief that had calcified into something harder. "I buried them in unmarked graves because I couldn't afford headstones. Then I couldn't go forward to Oregon, and I couldn't go back to Ukraine. So I stayed here." Frozen, Albertina understood, freezing. She understood being caught between a past you couldn't return to and a future you couldn't reach. I ran from Vicksburg, she said, surprised by her own honesty. My stepfather was violent. My mother looked away. The last time he cornered me, I fought back, broke his nose with a cast-iron pan. The whole town said I was the problem, said I deserved whatever happened. She traced a pattern on the table with her finger. I came here thinking I'd find safety. Instead, I found another man who wants me to disappear. You're not disappearing. No, she agreed. I'm not. They ate in comfortable silence after that. Not friends exactly, but two people who recognized each other's wounds. As Albertina prepared to leave, Boris spoke again. The coat, the food, the boots. He didn't look at her. It's not just me. There are others who think Lorenzo Udinesi has gotten away with too much for too long. Who? People who remember Consuelo. People who know what Lorenzo did to get his timber contracts. People who are tired of being afraid. He stood, placing coins on the table. You're not alone, Albertina, even when it feels like you are. She walked back to Nevada City with his words warming her more than the wool coat. The package was waiting at the hotel when she returned. Brown paper, carefully wrapped, postmarked Vicksburg, Mississippi. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside were letters. Her letters, the ones she'd left behind when she fled, and beneath them, a note in her younger sister's handwriting. Albertina, he's dead. Fell down the stairs drunk last month. You're free. These belong to you. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to help before. I am now. Your sister, Dora. Albertina pressed the letters to her chest and, for the first time since arriving in California, allowed herself to cry. Albertina spread the letters across her pallet in the storage room, arranging them by date. 6 months of correspondence. Carefully preserved by her sister, despite the danger, despite their stepfather's rage, despite everything. Dora's note lay on top. These belong to you. I'm sorry I waited so long. He can't hurt you anymore. He died last month. Be free. He was dead. The man who'd terrorized them both, who'd driven Albertina across the country in desperate flight, was gone. She should have felt relief. Instead, she felt only a hollow numbness. Some wounds ran too deep for a single death to heal. She pushed thoughts of Vicksburg aside and focused on Consuelo's letters. She read them in order, letting his voice emerge from the careful handwriting. He wrote about the Sierra Nevada mountains, about the smell of pine sap in summer, about his small lumber operation and his hopes for the future. I am not a wealthy man, he'd written in the third letter, but I am honest. I believe in fair dealing and hard work. I think we could build something good together, Miss Grease. Something lasting. With each letter, his formality had softened. By the 5th month, he was signing them yours in hope. Consuelo, instead of respectfully, C. Udinesi. The final letter was dated November 20th, 1892, 3 days before he died. Albertina's hands trembled as she unfolded it. Dear Albertina, I hope you'll forgive my informality. After 6 months, surely we can use Christian names. Your last letter arrived yesterday, and I've read it 3 times already. Your description of the Mississippi winter made me laugh. You write that you're tired of mud and rain, And here I am inviting you to California, where we have both in abundance. But our winters are milder, I promise, and the springs are glorious. I've done something I hope you'll approve of. I've purchased 20 acres of timberland near Eugene, Oregon. It's beautiful country, mountains, a creek, good soil. I've had the deed registered in both our names, Consuelo Udinesi and Albertina Grease. I know we haven't met yet, and perhaps this is presumptuous, but I wanted you to know that when you come here, you'll be coming to something that's already partly yours. You're not just accepting my charity or my proposal. You're becoming a partner in our future. I cannot wait to meet you, Albertina. I have a good feeling about this, about us. Yours in hope and anticipation, Consuelo. The letter blurred as tears filled Albertina's eyes. She pressed it to her chest and let herself grieve, not for the man she'd never met, but for the future he'd believed in, the kindness he'd offered, the partnership he'd envisioned, and then, through the grief, understanding crystallized. I've had the deed registered in both our names. She read the line again and again. This changed everything. The next morning, Albertina asked Mr. Garrett for the day off and walked to Redding. She found the attorney's office on a side street near the courthouse, a modest single-story building with a hand-painted sign, Marcus Webb, Attorney at Law. Property disputes and mining claims. Inside, a young man looked up from a desk piled with documents. He was perhaps 30, with wire-rimmed spectacles and ink stains on his fingers. His suit was clean, but worn at the cuffs. "May I help you?" "I need a lawyer." Albertina set Consuelo's letters on the desk. "And I can't pay." Marcus Webb raised an eyebrow but didn't dismiss her. "What's this about?" Consuelo Udinesi, his brother Lorenzo, and a future that was stolen. Webb's expression shifted, interest replacing skepticism. He gestured to a chair. "Sit. Talk." Albertina told him everything. The letters, the telegram, Lorenzo's offer, her refusal. Webb listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. When she finished, he picked up Consuelo's final letter and read it carefully, then read it again. "This is substantial," he said finally. "Under California law, if property was deeded to both of you before his death, you have legal standing as a co-owner. The fact that you never married doesn't matter. The deed establishes your claim." "But Lorenzo said I had no legal standing, that our engagement wasn't formal." "Lorenzo lied." Webb set down the letter. "Or more accurately, he hoped you wouldn't know better. The question is whether we can prove the engagement was legitimate and not just exploratory correspondence. These letters help tremendously, but Lorenzo will argue that Consuelo was impulsive, that he made promises he didn't intend to keep, that you're an opportunist." Webb leaned back in his chair. "We need more." "What kind of more?" "Witnesses who knew about the engagement, documentation of the Oregon property, anything that proves Consuelo's intentions were serious and binding." Albertina thought of Signora Benedetti, of the anonymous allies Boris had mentioned. "I might be able to find witnesses." Webb studied her for a long moment. "I've seen the Udinesi family crush smaller timber operations, force out competitors, buy judges and sheriffs. Lorenzo Udinesi is ruthless. He paused. It's about time someone stood up to him. I'll take your case, Miss Grease. Pro bono. Why? Because the law should mean something beyond who can afford the best attorney. Webb smiled grimly. And because I'm tired of watching Lorenzo Udinesi get away with whatever he wants. They spent the next 2 hours going through the letters, building a timeline, discussing strategy. As Albertina prepared to leave, Webb asked, "Did Lorenzo allow you to examine Consuelo's personal effects?" "Yes. He said I could look through them. He seemed to think they were worthless. Look anyway. Carefully. Men like Consuelo keep records." That evening, Albertina returned to the Udinesi family home, a large Victorian on the edge of Reading. Lorenzo wasn't there. A housekeeper led her to a small room where Consuelo's belongings had been boxed. Clothes, books, business papers. She went through everything methodically. Shirts, ledgers, maps of timber claims, and then, at the bottom of the third box, a leather portfolio. Inside, deeds, contracts, financial records, and a mining claim near Nevada City. Attached to it was a document dated November 10th, 1892, a geologist's report. Albertina's hands shook as she read. Preliminary survey indicates strong likelihood of silver deposits. Recommend immediate development. Estimated value, substantial. 10 days before Consuelo died. 2 weeks before Lorenzo sent her that telegram. The next morning she showed it to Marcus Webb. His eyes widened. Does Lorenzo know about this? I don't think so. It was buried in Consuelo's personal papers. Webb set down the document carefully. If he knew about silver deposits, he would have already filed claims. This changes everything, Miss Grease. This isn't just about your right to exist. This is about money. Real money. Albertina looked at the geologist's report, then at Consuelo's final letter. She was no longer just fighting to be recognized. She was fighting to win. Lorenzo Udinesi learned about the attorney within 2 days. Reading was a small town, and news traveled faster than telegraph lines. The rumors started immediately. Albertina first noticed them at the general store. She'd come to buy thread and soap with her meager wages, but when she approached the counter, the conversation behind her went quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that screamed louder than words. Heard she's claiming they were engaged, a woman whispered, not quite soft enough. After exchanging a few letters. That's not an engagement. That's desperation. Lorenzo says she's from Mississippi, that she left under questionable circumstances. Money-hungry, probably. Saw an opportunity when poor Consuelo died. Albertina kept her spine straight, paid for her items, and walked out without acknowledging them. But her hands shook as she tucked the package into her coat. The whispers followed her everywhere. At church, women pulled their skirts aside when she tried to sit. At the hotel, guests complained about the scandalous help washing their dishes. Mr. Garrett defended her, but Albertina saw the strain in his eyes. Lorenzo Udinesi's displeasure could ruin a small business. The town was dividing, and she stood at the fault line. Boris became more visible in his support. He waited for her after church on Sundays, walking with her through the center of town where everyone could see. He sat with her at the Silver Creek restaurant, no longer at separate tables. When she walked to Reading for meetings with Marcus Webb, Boris appeared with his wagon, offering rides he no longer pretended were coincidental. It cost him. Albertina overheard two ranchers talking outside the feed store. Boris better watch himself. Udinese timber provides half the work in this valley. Man can't make a living if Lorenzo decides he's a problem. But Boris kept showing up. "Why are you doing this?" Albertina asked him one Sunday after service. "You'll lose business. Maybe your position at the ranch." "Already lost what mattered most," Boris replied quietly, not afraid of losing things that don't. In early January, the town held a belated Christmas feast, delayed by a blizzard that had shut down the roads for a week. The celebration took place in the town hall, and everyone was expected to attend. Even Albertina, though the invitation felt more like a summons. The hall was decorated with pine boughs and red ribbon. Long tables groaned under platters of roasted meat, bread, pies, and preserved fruits. Children ran between the tables, while a fiddle player tuned his instrument near the small stage. Lorenzo Udinese stood near the front, dressed impeccably, playing the role of magnanimous community leader. He smiled and shook hands, the picture of bereaved dignity and civic responsibility. Albertina stood near the back with Boris, her new wool coat buttoned tight, her borrowed boots solid on the wooden floor. Ruth caught her eye from across the room and gave a small nod of encouragement. After the meal, Lorenzo took the stage. "Friends," he began, his voice carrying easily through the hall. "This has been a difficult season for my family. My brother Consuelo's death was a tragedy that still weighs heavy on my heart." He paused, allowing sympathetic murmurs to ripple through the crowd. "But even in grief, we must address practical matters with compassion." Albertina's stomach tightened. She knew what was coming. "Some of you may have heard that a young woman arrived in Reading on Christmas Eve, believing herself engaged to my brother. Miss Albertina Grease is with us tonight." Lorenzo gestured vaguely in her direction, forcing all eyes to turn toward her. "I want to publicly acknowledge the unfortunate confusion that brought her here, and to offer my assistance in helping her return home to Mississippi with traveling funds and my best wishes." He made it sound like charity, like kindness, like she was a confused child who'd made a mistake and needed rescuing. The implication hung in the air. She was delusional, opportunistic, someone to be pitied and dismissed. Albertina's hands began to shake. Beside her, Boris touched her elbow lightly, not restraining, just steadying. She stepped forward. The crowd parted as she walked toward the stage, her footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. Lorenzo's expression remained pleasant, but something cold flickered in his eyes. Albertina climbed the 3 steps to the stage. Her legs trembled, but she locked her knees and faced the crowd. Every person she'd passed in the street, every whisper she'd heard, every cold shoulder she'd received, all of them were here, watching. "My name is Albertina Grease," she began, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "I came to Reading on Christmas Eve to marry Consuelo Udinese. We corresponded for 6 months. He asked me to come. He asked me to build a life with him." She pulled Consuelo's final letter from her coat pocket. The paper was worn from repeated readings, but the words remained clear. "This is the last letter Consuelo wrote to me. Dated November 20th, 1892. 3 days before he died. She began to read aloud. Dear Albertina, I hope you'll forgive my informality. After 6 months, surely we can use Christian names. I've done something I hope you'll approve of. I've purchased 20 acres of timberland near Eugene, Oregon. I've had the deed registered in both our names, Consuelo Udinesi and Albertina Grease. The room went absolutely silent. Albertina continued reading, her voice growing stronger. I wanted you to know that when you come here, you'll be coming to something that's already partly yours. You're not just accepting my charity or my proposal. You're becoming a partner in our future. I cannot wait to meet you, Albertina. I have a good feeling about this, about us. She lowered the letter and looked directly at Lorenzo. Your brother didn't make empty promises. He put my name on a deed. He planned a future with me. And then he died, and you sent me a telegram pretending he'd canceled our engagement. You wanted me to disappear because my existence was inconvenient. Lorenzo's pleasant mask cracked slightly. Miss Grease, grief can make us. I didn't come here for money. Albertina cut him off, her voice ringing clear through the hall. I came because a good man asked me to build a life with him. His brother wants to pretend I never existed because it's convenient. But I'm standing here. She held up the letter. I existed to Consuelo. I exist now, and I'm not leaving. For 3 heartbeats, no one moved. Then Boris stood from his place at the back of the hall, not moving toward her, not speaking, just standing. Ruth stood next. Then Signora Benedetti, her black mantilla framing her fierce expression. Marcus Webb rose from his seat near the door. Mr. Garrett, the hotel manager, stood. One by one, others joined them. Not everyone, perhaps not even half, but enough. Enough to matter. Enough to show that Albertina wasn't alone. Lorenzo's face darkened. The pleasant civic leader vanished, replaced by something colder and more dangerous. This isn't over, he said quietly, but in the silence of the hall, everyone heard. No, Albertina agreed. It's not. She walked off the stage, through the parted crowd, and out into the January night. Snow was falling again, soft and silent, covering everything in white. Boris followed her outside. You all right? Albertina looked up at the sky, at the snow that seemed to fall from nowhere and everywhere at once. For the first time since stepping off that train on Christmas Eve, she felt something other than fear or rage or desperation. She felt hope. I will be, she said. For the first time, I think I will be. Behind them, through the open door of the town hall, voices rose in argument. The town had chosen its sides. The battle lines were drawn, but Albertina had found her voice, and she was no longer afraid to use it. 2 weeks after the town hall confrontation, fire came in the night. Albertina woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of animals screaming. For a moment, still caught between sleep and waking, she thought she was back in Vicksburg, back in the house where her stepfather's rage had once set the kitchen curtains ablaze. Then full consciousness returned, and with it, terror. She was in the small cabin on the ranch Boris managed, 3 miles outside Redding. He'd offered her the space a week earlier. Better than the hotel storage room, he'd said, and she could help with cooking and mending in exchange for room and board. She'd accepted, grateful to be away from the whispers and stares of Nevada City. Now, through the cabin's single window, she saw orange light dancing against the darkness. The barn was burning. Albertina threw off her blankets and ran outside in her nightdress and boots, the cold night air hitting her like a fist. The barn was fully engulfed, flames shooting 20 feet into the black sky. Inside, horses screamed and cattle bellowed in panic. Boris was already there, fighting to open the main doors against the heat and smoke. His shirt was singed, his face streaked with soot. "Help me," he shouted over the roar of the fire. Together they wrenched the doors open. Smoke poured out, thick and choking. Albertina pulled her nightdress up over her nose and mouth and plunged into the inferno after Boris. The heat was unbearable. The smoke blinded her, but she could hear the animals, their terror, their suffering. She found the first stall by touch, fumbled with the latch, and released a panicked mare that bolted past her into the night. Then another stall, another horse. Boris worked on the other side of the barn, releasing cattle that stampeded toward the open doors, their eyes rolling white with fear. The fire spread faster than seemed possible, racing along the dry wooden beams, consuming everything. Albertina had just released the last horse when she heard the crack. A massive support beam, eaten through by fire, gave way with a sound like a gunshot. It fell in a shower of sparks and burning debris, crashing down where Boris stood. "Boris!" Albertina screamed. Through the smoke and flames, she saw him pinned beneath the beam, struggling to free himself. The fire was closing in, consuming the walls, the roof beginning to collapse. She had every reason to run. Every instinct screamed at her to save herself, to get out while she still could. She'd survived Vicksburg, survived the journey west, survived Lorenzo's attempts to erase her. She could survive this, too, if she ran. Instead, she moved toward the flames. The heat seared her exposed skin. Embers burned through her nightdress. But she reached Boris and grabbed the beam with both hands. It was impossibly heavy, impossibly hot. She pulled with strength she didn't know she possessed, screaming with effort. The beam shifted slightly. Enough. Boris dragged himself free, his shirt smoking, his hands and arms burned. Albertina hauled him to his feet, threw his arm over her shoulders, and half carried, half dragged him toward the doors. They stumbled into the snow just as the roof collapsed behind them with a roar like thunder. The force of it threw them forward. They hit the ground hard, gasping for air that didn't burn, their bodies tangled together in the snow. The barn was gone. Nothing but flames and falling timbers remained, but they were alive. Sheriff Morrison arrived at dawn with 2 deputies. He walked through the smoking ruins, his expression grim. When he returned, he held a broken kerosene lamp in his gloved hand. "Accelerant," he said flatly. "Fire started in 3 places. This wasn't an accident." "Lorenzo Udinese," Albertina said. The sheriff's jaw tightened. "I can't prove that. But you know it. Knowing and proving are different things, Miss Grease. Without evidence, Without evidence, he gets away with it. She looked at the destroyed barn, at Boris sitting on the cabin steps with his burned hands wrapped in wet cloth. Again. The sheriff said nothing, but his silence was answer enough. Word spread through Reading by noon. Even those who'd sided with Lorenzo at the town hall began to question. Whispers turned from accusations against Albertina to uncomfortable speculation about how far Lorenzo would go to protect his interests. Burning a man's barn? Albertina heard one shopkeeper say. That's beyond business. That's personal. That's criminal, another replied. For the next week, Albertina tended Boris in the cabin. His burns were serious but not life-threatening. 2nd degree on his hands and forearms, smoke damage to his lungs. The town doctor came daily to change bandages and check for infection. Albertina brought him food, changed his dressings, read to him from the newspapers and the single book he owned, a collection of Ukrainian folk tales, translated into English. In the quiet hours, they talked. When this is over, Boris asked one evening, his voice still raspy from smoke inhalation, what will you do? Albertina paused in wrapping his left hand. I don't know. I thought I had a plan once. It died with Consuelo. Plans can change. Boris watched her face carefully. Len doesn't care who dreamed it first. That Oregon property, it's yours now, or will be if your attorney wins. What will you do with 20 acres? I never thought past the fighting. She tied off the bandage gently. I've been so focused on refusing to disappear that I forgot to imagine what comes after. After you live. Boris flexed his bandaged fingers experimentally. Maybe not the life you planned, but a life. That's more than some people get. Their eyes met and held. Something unspoken passed between them. Not love, not yet, but recognition, understanding, the possibility of something more than survival. I wouldn't know how to run a ranch, Albertina said softly. Good thing you know someone who does. A smile tugged at her lips, the first real smile in weeks. Is that an offer? It's a thought. For after. Meanwhile, Marcus Webb prepared for court. The case would be heard in Sacramento in 2 weeks. Lorenzo had filed counterclaims. Consuelo had been mentally unstable in his final months. The engagement was invalid. Albertina was a fraud, seeking to exploit a dead man's generosity. It'll be brutal, Webb warned her during one of their strategy sessions. He'll attack your character, your past in Mississippi, everything. He'll paint you as a desperate woman who latched onto a lonely man's letters. Are you ready for that? Albertina thought of Vicksburg, of her stepfather's violence and her mother's willful blindness, of the neighbors who'd called her a troublemaker, a liar, worse, of running across half the country only to face another man who wanted her to not exist. She'd spent her whole life hiding from accusations, running from shame that wasn't hers to carry. She was done running. I'm ready, she said. I'm ready to stop hiding. Webb smiled grimly. Then let's give Lorenzo Udinese the fight of his life. We're nearing the end of Albertina's journey, and I hope you've been as moved by her story as I have been telling it. If you've made it this far, you're clearly invested in these historical tales of resilience. Please consider subscribing. It truly keeps this channel alive and allows me to research and share more forgotten stories. Your like and comment mean everything. The Sacramento courthouse was built of granite and marble, designed to intimidate. Its high ceilings echoed with footsteps, and winter light filtered through tall windows onto polished floors. Albertina sat beside Marcus Webb at the plaintiff's table, her hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. Behind her, Boris sat in the gallery, his bandaged hands resting on his knees. Late January, 1893. Everything had led to this moment. Lorenzo's attorneys were everything Marcus Webb was not. Expensive suits, leather briefcases, voices trained in prestigious law schools. They presented their case with cold precision. Consuelo Udinesi was an impulsive man, the lead attorney argued, pacing before the judge. Given to romantic notions and poor judgment in his final months. The so-called engagement was never formalized. No announcement was made, no contract signed. Miss Grease is an opportunist who saw a lonely man's correspondence and invented a claim to his estate. They produced affidavits from Vicksburg, lies manufactured by her stepfather's friends, claiming she'd stolen from her family, implying moral failings too vague to be specific, but damaging nonetheless. Albertina sat through the character assassination with clenched fists, feeling each accusation like a physical blow. But she didn't look away, didn't hide. Marcus Webb's counterargument was methodical and devastating. He presented all 6 months of letters, showing sustained, documented correspondence. He showed the Oregon property deed, registered in both names before Consuelo's death. Then came the surprise, the mining claim documents and the geologist's report. Mr. Udinesi would have this court believe his brother was impulsive and unreliable, Webb said, his voice carrying through the courtroom. Yet Consuelo Udinesi made sound business investments, including this mining claim that geological surveys suggest contains substantial silver deposits. Lorenzo Udinesi claims to be protecting his brother's legacy, yet he sent a telegram terminating the engagement before Miss Grease even arrived, before she could claim any rights. One might ask, what was he protecting? His brother's reputation, or his own inheritance? The implication hung in the air. Lorenzo had known about the mining claim's value and wanted it for himself. Webb called character witnesses. Ruth testified about Albertina's dignity and work ethic. Signora Benedetti spoke of Consuelo's genuine affection in his letters. Even Mr. Begarrett, the hotel manager, testified to her character. Then Albertina took the stand. It was rare for women to testify in 1893. Rarer still for them to be believed. But the judge, an older man with silver hair and tired eyes, gestured for her to proceed. Lorenzo's attorney approached, like a predator. Miss Grease, you fled Mississippi under questionable circumstances. Why? Albertina met his eyes. I ran from violence. My stepfather was a dangerous man. Staying would have killed me. Convenient that he's not here to defend himself. He's dead. Fell down the stairs, drunk. But even if he were alive, I wouldn't apologize for surviving him. You claim you came to California for safety, not money. Yet here you are, claiming property worth thousands. I came because a good man asked me to build a life with him. I didn't ask for wealth. I asked for a life. Her voice strengthened. Consuelo gave me that in his letters. Respect, partnership, a future. Then he died, and his brother tried to erase me. I'm not here for money. I'm here because I exist, and I refuse to pretend otherwise. The attorney pressed harder. If you had nothing to hide, why run from Mississippi? Albertina leaned forward slightly, her voice clear and unwavering, because staying would have killed me. And now I'm choosing to stay somewhere that might let me live. The judge's expression shifted, something that might have been understanding. Closing arguments stretched into the afternoon. Webb argued law and justice. Lorenzo's attorneys argued tradition and proper procedure. Then the judge retired to deliberate. They waited overnight in a modest Sacramento hotel. Albertina didn't sleep. Boris sat with her in the lobby until dawn, not speaking, just present. The verdict came at 10 o'clock the next morning. The judge cleared his throat. This court cannot grant widows' rights, as no marriage took place. However, the evidence clearly shows that Consuelo Udinese deeded property in Oregon to both himself and Miss Grease before his death. This constitutes legal co-ownership regardless of marital status. Albertina's breath caught. Furthermore, the mining claim near Nevada City was documented as a joint investment with intent to share proceeds. Miss Grease is entitled to her portion of both properties. The court awards her co-ownership of the Oregon land and 50% interest in the mining claim. Lorenzo's face went white, then red. Outside the courthouse, he confronted her one final time. "You've won nothing," he hissed. "That land is wilderness. You'll fail." Albertina met his eyes without flinching. "Maybe, but it'll be my failure, not yours to define." The celebration in Redding was muted but real. Ruth baked a cake. Signora Benedetti brought wine. Boris said nothing, but his smile spoke volumes. Within a week, Albertina sold her share of the mining claim to a silver consortium for $3,000, a fortune in 1893. Enough to build a life, enough to be free. Spring approached. The snow began to melt, and Albertina stood at a crossroads, holding the deed to 20 acres in Oregon and a bank draft that meant she could go anywhere, do anything. The question was, what did she want? March 1893. The snow was melting. Albertina stood on 20 acres of Oregon timber country near Eugene, the deed to the property folded in her coat pocket. Creek water rushed over stones somewhere to her left. Mountains rose in the distance, still white-capped, but softening in the spring sun. The land rolled gently. Good soil, Boris had said. Sheltered valley. Water access. He stood beside her now, surveying the empty acres with a practiced eye. "Needs a barn," he said finally. "Cattle always come before houses." Albertina laughed, a real laugh, unburdened and free. The sound surprised her. She couldn't remember the last time laughter hadn't felt like defiance. She could sell this land, take her $3,000 and go anywhere. San Francisco, Seattle, back east to cities where no one knew her name. She could start completely fresh, erase everything that had happened and become someone new. But this land was meant to be a beginning. Consuelo had believed that. had registered her name beside his own before they'd ever met, offering partnership instead of charity. Why not let it be the beginning it was always meant to be? "Would you want to build something here?" Albertina asked, not looking at Boris. "With me?" It wasn't a marriage proposal. It was too soon for that. Too fragile. But it was an offer of partnership, of shared labor and shared future. Boris was quiet for a long moment. "I've been stuck for 5 years. Couldn't move forward. Couldn't go back. Maybe it's time to move." They shook hands like business partners sealing a deal, a promise, not a vow. But promises could grow into something more solid than vows ever were. Word spread back to Reading. Supplies began to arrive. Lumber and nails from the Reading mill, tools from the general store, seeds from Ruth's restaurant garden. Marcus Webb sent a box of law books with a note. "For frontier life. You'll need to know your rights." A letter came from an unexpected source. Lucia Udinesi, Lorenzo's younger sister. "I was the one who left the coat and food. I'm sorry I couldn't do more. I hope Oregon gives you the peace my family never could." Building began in April. Boris was right. The barn came first. They worked from dawn until dusk, their hands blistering, their backs aching. Then came the cabin, modest, sturdy, built with their own hands and help from neighbors who arrived unannounced to raise beams and hammer shingles. By summer, structures rose where empty land had been. Sometimes Albertina paused in her work and remembered, stepping off the train in Reading with 19 cents and nowhere to go. Boris sharing his plate without asking questions. The fire, the trial, all the moments when she could have disappeared, but chose to stay. Now she stood on her own land, hammering nails into wood that would shelter them through winter, planting a garden that would feed them through the year. One evening in July, she and Boris sat on the cabin's unfinished porch, watching the sun set over their valley. He reached for her hand, tentative, asking permission. She gave it. "This is more than I thought I'd have again," Boris said quietly. "Me too." Albertina squeezed his fingers gently, and I didn't even know to want it. In August, a letter arrived from Vicksburg. Dora's handwriting, careful and hopeful. "I'm saving money. I want to visit in the spring. I want to see what you've built." Albertina wrote back immediately. "Come. There's room here for anyone who needs it." She understood now that home wasn't where you were wanted. It was where you were willing to stay. Where you planted roots deep enough to weather storms. Where you built something with your own hands and called it yours. She looks like someone the world tried to erase. But here she stands, solid and rooted, written in soil and timber. Here she stands. The cabin's chimney sends smoke curling into the evening sky. The garden grows in neat rows. 2 figures sit on the porch as darkness falls, their hands clasped, their futures uncertain, but theirs to shape. Not the life Albertina planned, but the life she chose. And that made all the difference.